There's another escalation in the Kremlin. They are threatening the United States of America with war if they don't lift the sanctions and still deliver long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin responded to Donald Trump regarding his decision to impose sanctions against Russia, as well as the rumors that Ukraine might still receive Tomahawk missiles. In particular, the Russian dictator believes that the new United States sanctions supposedly will not have a significant impact on the Russian economy. He says that, of course, they will hit the economy of the Russian Federation, but claims that it will be worse for the United States of America, not for Russia. Trump, by the way, has already mocked Putin's statement and called to wait for 6 months. But there were also threats. Putin responded to the words of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Ukraine could still receive long-range Tomahawk missiles. In particular, Putin threatened a serious response to strikes on Russian territory with them. Well, later it's true, Peskov apologized and said that Putin was misunderstood, but nevertheless, what's been said has already been said. Overall, Putin's position looked a bit confused. Well, let's talk about this in more detail in this episode. My name is Pechiy. Today is October 24th. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and please leave any comment under this episode. Subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. That's what it's called. And the link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel financially, you can do so with any donation or by subscribing through YouTube sponsorship. All links and instructions are in this video's description. It says, support the channel Pechiy. Choose the format that is most convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you can give. So, recently Trump finally took decisive steps to force the Russians, led by Putin, to stop the war against Ukraine. Trump ultimately imposed those sanctions. The United States Department of the Treasury announced on Thursday the introduction of additional sanctions against the oil company Rosneft and the company Lukoil. Both companies, let me remind you, specialize in the exploration, extraction, production, processing, transportation, and sale of oil, natural gas, and petroleum products in Russia and abroad. The United States Department of the Treasury also imposed sanctions on several subsidiaries of both companies. All property and interests of the specified companies or individuals in the United States will be frozen, and United States persons or organizations will not be allowed to do business with them. But Trump also cancelled the meeting with Putin in Budapest and directly stated that he simply doesn't want to waste his precious time on someone like Putin. Now Putin has decided to respond to all this. I'll say right away, Putin's responses sounded somewhat uncertain and even confused. Putin clearly didn't expect this from Donald Trump, but he tried to show that no, Russians have everything under control. It's funny that Putin, who was so confident just yesterday, today said that all these steps by Trump mean nothing, and Russia, quote, supports continuing the dialogue with Washington. And what do you think? Maybe Putin threatened some kind of response to the United States over the sanctions? No, Putin has clearly backed down and now claims American sanctions hurt Russia, but will hurt the United States even more. Because gas prices will go up there. Although we can clearly see who actually has problems with gasoline. And to understand the full extent of Putin's confusion today, I'll give you two examples where Putin directly threatened, the United States of America and Europe. The first one is a rather amusing incident happened. The European Union, as part of a new package of sanctions, essentially banned the sale to Russia plastic toilets, bidets, wash basins, flush tanks, and similar items, essentially everything related to toilets and plumbing. And so Vladimir Putin tried to make a joke in response to such measures by the European Union, but apparently he was poorly informed and thought that it was the Europeans who refused to buy Russian toilets, not that Russians were banned from buying European ones. And then a quote from Putin. The fact that they canceled the purchase of our toilets will cost them dearly. I think they would need them in today's situation. And secondly, Putin stated that the response to the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine will be serious, to say the least. Shocking. Well, as we can see, Putin and Russia as a whole were striking at energy facilities, kindergartens, maternity hospitals, and hospitals in 2022, and they continue to hit the same targets in 2025. Regardless of the weapons supplied to Ukraine and the permission to use them, He attacked hospitals and cities before high-mobility artillery rocket system and kept doing so after they arrived. So, unfortunately, the only thing Putin can shock us with is new cynical strikes on a kindergarten in Kharkiv. But let me still give you a few quotes from Vladimir Putin. I'll start with how Putin pretended that, supposedly but not really, Trump was canceling a meeting with the Russian president in Budapest. It was actually the other way around. Let me remind you of the day Trump said he cancelled his meeting with Putin in Budapest. The Russians, Peskov, Lavrov, Ryabkov, and Hungarians, Sijarto, Orban, publicly assured that preparations for the Putin-Trump meeting were underway, and all the rumors about its cancellation are fake. And today, Putin stated, quote, "The meeting and its location were proposed by the American side. I agreed but said these meetings must be well prepared. I see the President of the United States has cancelled or postponed the meeting. Dialogue is always better than confrontation, arguments, or even more so, war. We support the continuation of dialogue." Here's how Putin responded to Trump's initial sanctions on Russia. What do you think Russia's main message is about the sanctions? Of course, it's unclear, but the Americans will be really shocked by the sanctions against Russia. Next is a big quote, I would say a mini lecture from Vladimir Putin. There's nothing new for us in the sanctions. They are serious and will have certain consequences, but they will not significantly affect our economic well-being. Hello to Russians facing tax hikes. When the economy is strong, do taxes go up? I'll continue the quote. During his first term, Trump imposed a large number of sanctions. This is just an attempt to apply pressure, but no self-respecting country makes decisions under pressure. This is political. This is an unfriendly act towards Russia. It does not strengthen Russian-American relations, which have only just begun to recover. With these actions, the United States is harming our relations. Economically, there is nothing good about it. The United States produces more oil than anyone else, but it consumes more than it sells. Saudi Arabia and Russia are in second and third place in production, but they consume less than they produce. Our contribution to the global energy balance is very significant. Disrupting this balance is a thankless task, including for those who are trying to do it. Let me digress for a moment. The Russian contribution to the European energy balance has shown that if there is a strong desire, it is quite possible to give up Russian oil and gas and survive. Nothing terrible happened. Moreover, Putin is simply afraid to admit to Russians that the United States once broke this very energy balance in order to collapse the Soviet Union's economy. Putin definitely remembers this case and knows that the balance can be shaken in any direction. What do I mean? Let me remind you, in the mid-1980s, the administration of United States President Ronald Reagan encouraged Saudi Arabia to sharply and significantly increase oil production. This move was seen as a kind of geopolitical weapon against the Soviet Union, since low oil prices undermined the Soviet economy. The Saudis and Americans could afford it. They could afford a period of very low oil prices. Later, when the drop in prices started to negatively affect the American oil industry, the United States President's administration asked Saudi Arabia to cut production again. But importantly, by that time the Soviet economy had already suffered an irreversible blow, and as a result, a couple of years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. This is a great example of how the energy balance can easily be shaken in any direction, how the Russian economy can be completely crashed, and then everything can be brought back to the way it was, and they can say, well, basically we're just returning everything to how it was before. But I'll continue quoting Putin. Putin says, and then Putin gave a truly remarkable quote in which he directly acknowledges the influence of the Ukrainian authorities. He doesn't just recognize the Ukrainian authorities, but admits their influence on global processes. Quote, "Those who suggest such decisions to the current administration, we need to understand who they are working for. We feel confident and stable, and despite certain losses, our energy sector feels quite secure. Putin then began pleading for cooperation with the Americans and even sent his envoy Dmitriev to Washington to request sanctions relief. Another quote, "If we move on to a serious conversation about the future, including in the economic sphere, then we have many areas for joint work." Well, I don't know what Putin is counting on, and in general the image of a Russian. Let's imagine this average Russian. What is he counting on? This average Russian was just foaming at the mouth and shouting that Europeans would freeze without Russian gas. He'd say there are gays everywhere there. He was badmouthing America, Europe, and the Western world in general. This went on for several years. Afterward, Putin says, "We have many areas for cooperation." With whom? With these savages and this rabble who have been bad-mouthing us for years? The West cooperate with you? Well, I don't know. Well, in fact, that's Putin's entire response to Trump's actions. There was Medvedev, yeah, he tried to threaten the United States and Trump personally, but who even pays attention to that clown anymore? But Putin has clearly lost his nerve. I no longer hear him boasting that Russia will defeat everyone. No, now he says they support dialogue and want to cooperate in many areas. That's it. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.